Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? This bright, it's a Monday morning for you and I in real historical time. It's Tuesday morning when our wonderful listeners are plugging us in all over the world in their gyms and on their beaches, walking their dogs. How's your football weekend been?
It was really good to begin with. But, in terms of the quality of the matches and the goals flowing in, if England proceed to the final, then who cares? There's no doubt, Kieran. If we do win it, when I won't be there booing the open top bus, saying why didn't you start Adam Wharton? Trent Alexander-Arnold's not a midfield player. You may notice, Kieran, I'm a little bit fragile. A friend of ours, Dickie, who the ever generous Dickie, has set up I can only describe it as a gazebo cum bar at the side of his house for the tournament. So half the Paulson's Arms were watching the game last night. And the first 15 minutes, it was very noisy. And then it went a bit quiet a bit. And then the last 15 minutes was just as noisy, but a different sort of noise. Most of which involved the words Trent off, Wharton on, essentially. But you know someone, Kieran. I've got a friend who was there last night who recently retired and therefore has enough time on his hands. He's already filled in his wall chart. He got himself 2 wall charts and he's already filled it in with his predictions the whole way through, which is a source of some amusement. Not just who's going to win, but the scores. He hasn't got one right yet, and he certainly didn't get last night's right. But you know somebody who's actually done a slightly cleverer version of that, Kieran. That's right. 2 of my colleagues who are proper academics, not sort of cocky wide boys like me, have utilised a supercomputer and machine learning and artificial intelligence, all of these things which are going to replace the world and probably replace you and I. I don't think they can get jaundiced cynicism and sarcasm to the levels of perfection that we have delivered in the past few years. Some of my colleagues have created a supercomputer and they put in a huge amount of data into it and they published that in a proper academic journal. So I managed to get hold of Ben Holmes this morning before we recorded the show, and I've had a little chat with him about how the results are going to go, and it might save my marriage.
I don't think your marriage doesn't need saving, Kieran, but I don't think the AI has been invented yet that would do it if it was possible. I look forward to hearing that, Kieran, so we're going to play that short interview in at the end of this questions pod. I'm going to call you Professor Cocky Wide Boy from now on. That sounds like one of those double-barreled names from the 50s. I can just see you with a tweed jacket and a pipe. It's Professor Cocky Wide Boy. And I just wonder if Ben Holmes if the computer's got a voice that says, there is no countdown. Apparently all computers talk like that. It is Questions Day, Kieran, but as you say, we now have a little bonus interview, which is lovely. We also have one news story, Kieran, which I can't avoid because I've been asked about it by so many Palace fans, and that is our mysterious new shirt sponsor. There are a couple of things that our mysterious new shirt sponsor are vehemently denying, so we've been advised not to speculate on the identity of the CEO and whether a particular photograph is or isn't her or him, and we've also been advised not to speculate on rumours that are bounding across the world about their background in cockfighting. So all we can do, Kieran, as a Palace fans, is ask you who our sponsors are and apologise to Wolves fans for laughing at the idea of their mystery sponsors not 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yes, Palace now have what they're calling a record sponsorship deal, a 2-year deal with a company called Net88. Now, Net88 is a company which didn't even have a trademark as far as the UK was concerned until March. As far as its UK website is concerned, it is, and I quote, under construction. It's got a few badges for some of the gambling charities, and that's about it. I went to its Facebook page. It has 1 follower on Facebook. I think it now has 140 followers on Twitter. But they've given they've signed an estimated £6.5 million a year deal with Palace for a front of shirt sponsorship.
And here, sort of, the cynicism which we don't want to display becomes displayed. The Premier League made a big fuss a few months ago when it was trying to get into the good books of the government and trying to persuade the government that it was very good and fine and dandy when it comes to running its own affairs, that gambling sponsorship was on the way out. And it said, it's at the end of 25, 26. So that was giving clubs a bit more time to run down existing sponsorships, and that's very much how it was marketed. But it does, of course, mean that clubs have, within the rules, been able to sign these new deals. And there's no doubt that the gambling industry has the biggest pockets because it's a very profitable business. It's targeting a demographic who are connected to sport, who are watching television and so on. Net88 doesn't appear to be UK facing. It is aimed at the Asian markets, and it's a bit strange given that some of quite a few Asian countries ban bookmakers and gambling. So you're wondering why this is all taking place. So it's sort of coincided with Wolverhampton Wanderers appearing to sign a very similar deal with DBet, again a company which has had no presence in the UK. And then I say to myself, well, hold on, Manchester United, which is surely the biggest brand in English football, they had a 6-year deal with Chevrolet, and Chevrolet is not a UK-facing company. Is this simply a function of the Premier League being a globalized product? What are the alternatives? Because people like Kazoo going into administration. I know Palace had Cinch. Well, one of their rival products was Kazoo. There are many other industries which are cutting back as far as their marketing spend is concerned. But when it comes to gambling, it's all about brand awareness. So that's the position. Palace are very much trumpeting this as a record deal, and that's fine. Certainly, when I've spoken to chief executives in the past, when it comes to what you might call the white label gambling company, and this is what white label means, that it doesn't actually have a presence in the UK as such, and it's just using a nominal company to provide its UK gambling license. They go round 4 or 5 clubs, and they'll go round Palace, Bournemouth, Wolves, and so on, and they will try to negotiate down a deal to get it for as cheap as possible. So it's not a slight on Palace or any other clubs. They're just trying to get eyeballs, and they're willing to pay substantial sums. It's an industry which is allowed. It's an industry which, in my view, does tokenism when it comes to its broader responsibilities. But that's not a topic for this podcast.
Are you implying, Kieran, that the good people at Net88 are not lifelong Palace fans? That they would have got into bed with any Premier League club willing to put their hand up and say, we'll take that money?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm saying it quite cheerfully. It's simply business. If it hadn't been Palace, they'd have looked for somebody else. And we saw that with DBet. And I think BK8, who have been sort of doing the rounds, they've been looking for other clubs as well. So rightly or wrongly, sponsorship of Premier League TV clubs makes a difference to the gambling industry when they're able to say, back in the homeland, even if gambling is illegal in a particular country, there are ways. Anybody that's got a VPN can gamble, even if it's illegal and so on.
A friend of mine has just come back from Vietnam, spent some time there, and he was telling us last night they are obsessed with the Premier League there, literally obsessed with it. He said most people in the streets are wearing Premier League shirts, and every conversation in a bar starts with which team do you support. And £6.5 million, Kieran, for a club like Palace is a huge amount of money. Presumably there'll be another sponsorship deal because obviously the kids can't wear the shirts with Net88 on. And I hate to end on a note of cynicism, Kieran, because as you say, we are not cynics, and Palace fans are not daft, because we all noticed the timing of the tweet the next day, which was saying, work has now started on the stand, everybody. We're actually doing some physical work, clearly implying that the money they've got from Net88 enabled them to start. So, note to all football club CEOs, commercial directors, we're not idiots. We can put 2 and 2 together. The trouble is we are unable to put 2 and 2 together without coming up with a range of numbers as the answer, Kieran, which must really annoy mathematicians like you. Our first question, Kieran, comes from a Spurs fan. you might be surprised to learn, Kieran, and again, we're not cynical, you might be surprised to learn that he has a couple of queries about Daniel Levy's business tactics, Kieran, would you believe? And it's Paul Robb has the question. And Paul says, I'm a lifelong Spurs supporter, and recently on another pod, you're allowed to listen to other pods. No, Kieran, they're allowed to listen to other pods. Once they can listen to another pod. I heard a theory about a tactic Daniel Levy may use. Levy's often involved in prolonged transfer negotiations, and instead of getting deals over the line early in the transfer window, he often leaves it very late, particularly in the summer window. Is it possible that he's doing this to save money? For example, 8 weeks per player at 100k a week, that's 1.6 million saved or not spent. It's risky because they could miss out on players and frustrate the hell out of everyone, including me. Have you heard of this before? And what do you think about it? I think, Kieran, sometimes fans underestimate how complex transfer deals can be, which is one answer. But is it possible that clubs deliberately wait till late in the window because then they're saving a bit of money on wages?
I don't think that is correct.
Right, okay.
And the reason why I say this is follows. I mean, I was looking at, Bissouma, when he signed for Spurs, he signed in June. So, clubs will be trying to get a deal across the line. But also, we think that the transfer window opens, I think it is going to be, is it this week?
Yes, I think, last Friday. I don't know.
Yeah. In reality, it's been open for a couple of months, and clubs will have made offers and negotiations will have started and so on with regards to players perhaps. But clubs have a list of players that they're looking to sign. You'll have your first, second, third, fourth and fifth picks. So it could be that some of the deals that Spurs have been involved with is because they're trying to negotiate for their third or fourth choice player, and they've lost out in terms of others. With regards to the financial implications, I get that figure of 1.6 million, but I would, however, say, given that one additional place in the Premier League is worth 3.4 million, from a coach's point of view, you want to get the players acclimatised to the culture of the club, to building relationships with their playing colleagues. And I think the negatives outweigh the positives in terms of that. Remember that the season starts in the second week in August, so we're fully aware of player A from Nottingham Forest who joined Spurs on the final day. So Paul could be sort of referring to deals like that. And Spurs have had a few deals on deadline day, as have all other clubs. Wasn't it Berbatov joined Manchester United from Spurs on the last day of the window and so on. It's a constant set of moving pieces. You might have played 2 or 3 games at the start of the season, and it's reinforced the coach's view that we are short in position A. That allows the coach to go back to the CEO and says, look, we're suffering here, and therefore we need to sign a player. So I don't think that's a valid criticism of Daniel Levy. He will have been in negotiation. I absolutely understand from Paul's point of view, and I always refer people back to Sir Alex Ferguson's legendary comment that negotiating with Daniel Levy was more painful than having his hip replaced. But that's a sort of a personality issue rather than Daniel trying to get a very minor financial gain out of this.
Negotiating is a pertinent word there, Kieran, as well, because most agents would be clever enough to recognise a delaying tactic. And if the player's not getting 100 grand a week for 6 weeks, then the agent's not getting 15, 20% of that either. So I think they would be looking to find a club that was willing to sign the player now, wouldn't they? So interesting to hear your views. Poor old Paul's going to be really disappointed now. He thought he had that rumbled, sussed. And David Gardner has our next question. David Gardner describes himself as a suffering Dundee United supporter. And David says, I wondered if you know what there is in place regarding the fit and proper person test in Scottish football and ethics and governance. As an inquiry into our latest recruitment of a finance director concerned me when I saw that he'd only qualified 4 days prior to us appointing him. Have you looked at the club's finances recently? If so, what is your opinion? What's up? Oh, what's upset him?
Oh, my granddaughter's just arrived, so he's gone into squeaky squeak mode.
Has he gone into cute? Oh.
just run out the squeaky badger to greet my granddaughter.
A toy badger, I hope, Kieran. I know you're in the countryside, but
Yes. So we're not in front, we're not in favour of country sports. I may live in the country, and I nearly had to call out the deer warden on Friday night. By the way, I was driving along, and it just turned dusk. And these 3 deer walked out, sort of just tried out. I had to slam the anchors on, and we do actually have a deer warden in our village, or sort of broad, slightly broader area.
You live in Midsummer?
Oh, I live in Mid Sussex.
Oh dear! I'm sorry again. That was very high on my list of unexpected. I nearly had to call the deer warden out the other night. What was the outcome of this terrible?
Well, fortunately, I managed to stop just in time. But these are they're magnificent creatures, but their knowledge of the highway code is a bit poor. And it's a huge issue for us down here, because they do, we are in the countryside, and they'll just wander across the road. And if you hit a deer, it's bad news. It's bad news for the deer, but you have to, there's lots of people try to sort of touch them, and so we do actually have a sort of a deer code in terms of contacting people, and it's not good for your car either. And certainly, one of my guys who I know that goes cycling, he crashed into a deer and fractured his hip. They're big creatures.
I have every sympathy for him, but I'm going to suggest that if he was on a bike, that's his fault. You've got enough time if you're on a bike to see a deer in the road and get out. I believe my knowledge of the countryside code is limited, Kieran, as you can understand, but I believe the first thing you do if you accidentally kill a deer is report straight to the back door of the nearest restaurant. I gather that's what you have to do. And then, mysteriously, there's venison ceviche on the menu that evening. Back to Paul's question. I nearly had to call out Can I just... sorry, David's question. I beg your pardon. Can I just ask Kieran, his talking about the finance director only qualified 4 days prior, is there legislation that ensures minimum qualifications or can a club appoint who they want?
No, you do not have to be a qualified accountant to have a job as a finance director. In fact, there are, as far as Scottish football is concerned, there isn't the same issue from a governance perspective with regards to the broader issue of owners and directors tests. And yet there appear to be fewer rogues in Scottish football compared to English football in general. I think it's because the opportunities to take financial advantage of clubs are not as advantageous as they are necessarily south of the border, although there have been some scandalous people involved in clubs. So we don't have the owners and directors test as such. As far as somebody being qualified 4 days prior, my argument would be, as somebody who examines accountants, that means he had to be technically up to date, because we don't set easy exams for them. So that's the position with the governance issue. As far as the club's finances are concerned, and first of all, congratulations to Dundee United for being promoted out of the Championship and back into the Premiership. They've not been having some good times recently. They've been relying on player sales because they were losing. I think it was in 2023, they lost 100 grand a week. They had to rely on player sales to cut that. This sounds worse than it is, that they are technically insolvent in the sense that they're reliant upon owners' loans to dig them out of the fact that the club is losing money on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's Mark Ogden is the guy that owns the club, and he's put in around about 11 or 12 million pounds interest-free into Dundee United to keep the lights on. And that's fine. And that is the case, as we know, certainly south of the border and in respect to some clubs north of the border as well. That is a common feature of modern day football. And it's something which I always say is both can be a strength and a weakness. It's a strength in the sense that it's great to have somebody who is willing to fund a football club, to effectively treat it as a trophy asset. But the downside of that is what happens if that person's circumstances change or they simply lose interest. And sort of going back to our initial discussion, we were laughing that Net88 probably don't have a Jim Cannon tattoo on their arm when they rock up to negotiate with Steve Parish. If people are doing decisions without having that link to the community, it's that much easier when owners decide, for whatever reason, that they're going to switch off the taps. And if you are losing money on a week-by-week basis, it makes things more precarious. But we must always remember, we're gentlemen of a certain age. How many football clubs have actually gone bust during our lifetime?
Yeah, fair point. Can I just clarify, Kieran, for David's benefit and also for a lot of listeners who may be slightly surprised? So the SPFL have no official fit and proper person criteria at all?
No, it's a very lean operation that the SPFL have. Because remember, every pound that you're spending on governance, every pound that you're spending on legal fees is £1 less that can be distributed towards clubs. And we spoke, I think it was last week, that the Premier League's legal bill this season is going to be £30 million. Well, Scottish football can't afford that. So that's where we are. So they rely on sort of internal governance and people doing the right thing.
And very briefly, Kieran, in passing, talking of clubs that have unfortunately gone bust, my cousin, I don't know if I mentioned this, Tom Stewart, has just signed for Bury as the number one goalkeeper. He's very excited. It had the funniest reveal I've ever seen on any Bury's Twitter feed. Had a photograph of a young man with his face covered by a ball, and then said, our new goalkeeper's coming. And then there's a photograph of a young man with his face not covered by a ball, which made me laugh a lot. I'm highly delighted that he's joined a club with that tradition and history, and he can't wait to be playing in front of crowds of 3,500, 4,000 next season. This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp Therapy Online. How's your year been so far? I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels like everything happens so fast and life can be a bit of a blur. When that happens, it's vital you take a moment to celebrate your wins and make adjustments for the rest of the year. Talking to family and friends or podcast pals can be great, but therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months.
If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you need to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. Once you get started, you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge.
And with over 1,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/price. That's betterhelp.com/price.
Hi, I'm Steve Lemack, and every week I'm joined by Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, on The Price of Music, the weekly podcast all about the money behind the music industry. In each episode, we discuss the very latest goings-on in the music business and dig into the finances behind the big stories.
So whether you're a music lover who just wants to know more about what really goes on in the industry, or you're an aspiring musician, manager or label owner who wants some inside knowledge on how Spotify's financial model really works, or what the future holds for independent live music venues, this is a show for you.
Subscribe to The Price of Music in your podcast app now. See you soon.
John Gannon. Nearly Jim Cannon, but John Gannon has our next question. And it's an interesting one, and it's one that has been up for discussion recently in the Football Governance Bill, I believe. John Gannon says, you often rightly cite the importance for clubs of not being separated from their grounds by unscrupulous owners. Should the FA lobby government have protected status applied to every ground that meets EFL standards on the basis of their social and cultural importance to the communities involved? The grounds would then be inseparable from the club, and change of use would only be permissible in the event a replacement ground deemed suitable by the local authority was built or came available. Now, a lot of us so-called legacy fans, I think, Kieran, would argue for that every day of the week, but on a business and financial basis, I'm not sure it's entirely practical.
Well, we are seeing quite a few fans groups lobbying clubs to have the stadium called what we refer to as an asset of community value, which doesn't give grade 2 listed status, but it does make it more difficult for a stadium to be sold to third parties. Also, if we take a look at the proposals for an independent regulator in football, one of the proposals is that fan organisations would, to a certain extent, have a power of veto over not necessarily ground sales, but ground moves. So that would have protection. I think it's fair to say we're not Ken Bates' biggest fan, but I think his greatest achievement at Chelsea was the creation of Chelsea pitch owners and the protection of Stamford Bridge. So there are schemes that can be put into operation whereby we're not Luddites. Moving from one location to another is an emotional thing. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. And as a supporter of a club that has moved from, it was the Goldstone was a dump, but it was our dump. But I don't actually miss it because the facilities were very poor there. So some form of protection could be made available through the legislator. And one of the things I think we're probably going to cover on Thursday's show is that I've been through the manifestos of the political parties just to sort of give it scores on the doors with regards to where we stand in respect of football and the potential governments that we could have. So John's question would, should the FA lobby government? Football fans have lobbied government through the fan-led review. And this was certainly one of the conclusions, and it has formed part of the role of fans going forwards in terms of protectors of the monopoly that is Crystal Palace for South London, or the part of South London you are, or Wolverhampton Wanderers, the city of Wolverhampton, or Walsall for the town of Walsall. And therefore, I think that is being taken into consideration because there is still a fear that some owners would quite happily like to franchise the Premier League and shift clubs to where they think they could make more money. And certainly, I've been reading an awful lot over the course of the weekend about what's happening in the US, and that bond certainly doesn't exist between owners and city councils and fans.
Yeah, we've got a very interesting question about US sport coming up in a moment. I was interested to hear Trevor Birch, Kieran, that interview we did with him. I was a bit taken aback as well to hear Trevor Birch talk about Ken Bates in such a positive fashion, which is quite a ballsy thing to say out loud, even now, given Ken Bates' reputation with most football fans.
Yes, I remember when Cuddly Ken thought it would be a good idea to put an electrified fence at Stamford Bridge. And whilst I am not a fan of the Chelsea fan base, I think that's perhaps a step too far and was indicative of the contempt with which fans were held back in, for what's better known as the day.
Oh, well, talking about the day, Stephen Smith, and I'm afraid this is an indication of how long it's taking to get questions asked sometimes, that Stephen's referring to a pod we did this time last year. But Stephen Smith said it was very interesting listening to the nostalgic pod you did about the formation of the Premier League, and it got me wondering which of the founding teams in the Premier League were the greatest in terms of player value.
The Premier League was started in 1992-93, so you didn't actually have squad costs and squad values in the same way that we do today. The accounting rules have been changed. But I have been through every set of accounts from 1992-93 to get an overall picture from sort of putting bits and pieces together. And the biggest spenders in terms of player costs that season was Blackburn Rovers, because we were in the Jack Walker era. Second was Liverpool, and third was Manchester United. So that was the start of the Premier League. And the three clubs with the lowest level of spending were at the bottom, Sheffield United, one place above them, Coventry City, and thirdly, QPR. And we often talk about the sort of the transition of the Premier League. Yeah, we're up to 50 clubs plus now have played in the competition. So it does give opportunities for clubs to come and go. You'll be pleased to know that Palace were 12th, which is a very traditional Crystal Palace place in the Premier League, apart from last season.
Well, it would have been, Kieran, had we finished 12th in the league. It's all right being 12th in that league. The actual league, we were relegated. So that's very interesting. Thank you, Kieran.
The total spending that season, and this is just shows how much the numbers have gone crazy. The total spending by all 22 clubs, because it was a 22 club competition to begin with, was £65 million.
Wow.
Yeah, and today you'd say if one of the big six clubs signs a midfield player for 60, he must be useful, but not exceptional.
Yeah.
That's where we are in terms of the markets today.
And you say that 50 teams now have taken part in the Premier League.
Yeah.
So more.
Yeah.
Well, so way more than half of the teams in the pyramid have played in the Premier League. I would not have put it that high, Kim. That's very interesting.
So it does give opportunities, and 3 up, 3 down is part of that. That's why it was so disappointing to see, amongst many other things in Project Big Picture, that automatic 3 up, 3 down was part of the remit there for a truncated Premier League, and dropping to 16 or 18 teams. I can see the benefit for some clubs, but not others.
David Entwistle has a question, and a lot of people have been talking about the impact of Saudi money, Kieran, but David has a different angle on it. He wants to know, what impact will the influx of this new Saudi money have on European leagues? So out with our discussions on what it's having on the Premier League. So is this simply new money pumped into European leagues, and will it favour, as David thinks, will the bigger teams with most attractive players? I guess the answer to that is always going to be yes.
I think David's absolutely right. I mean, as far as the European leagues are concerned, where do they sell to? They can sell domestically. The Premier League is the biggest net buyer of players historically within Europe, certainly over the course of the last 10 to 15 years in particular. But there are many clubs that are operating on more restricted budgets. We saw Premier League spending in January, for example, to be substantially lower than it has been in most recent windows. So I think Saudi money is seen as an opportunity, especially if you are looking to shift players who are on big wages and nobody else within Europe is willing to match those wages. Saudi Pro League might say, well, actually, when it comes to wages, we're pretty relaxed. So there has been talk, for example, about Romelu Lukaku, who's still got 2 years remaining on his Chelsea contract. Who's going to pay him an estimated £300,000 a week? And the player should not have to go and take a discount just to make Todd Bowley's life a bit easier, in my view. The player is entitled to maximise their revenues. Nobody forced the club to sign that deal in the first place. So if a country such as Saudi Arabia comes along via the Saudi Pro League and is able to match or enhance that deal, then you can see that. And we have seen, I think, certainly sort of 12 months ago when there was a bit more of an outflow of players to the Saudi Pro League, that it was seen as a windfall by many clubs in respect of players who they couldn't find alternate homes for. So I don't think the Saudi Pro League is a bad thing for individual clubs. You do then start to raise eyebrows as to some of the deals going through, because they seem to sort of be beneficial to. And this is not a go at Newcastle. Actually, I was actually thinking of some other clubs whose owners might have influence or contracts or relationships there. But yeah, that's business, and that's the world that we're operating in today.
Jeff Sullivan has our penultimate question, Kieran, and don't forget we've got that interview coming up with the super predictor model provider. I'm very impressed that I got through that in one breath, Kieran. Jeff Sullivan has this interesting question about American sport. And I think this is a fascinating one, Kieran. Jeff says, it seems to me that football players here do not take advantage of their power as much as American sports unions do. Couldn't the players or the PFA, if they wanted to, could scuttle the entire FIFA Club World Cup just by refusing to play? And this has become a real hot ticket discussion point, the amount of games players are being asked. And Jeff's absolutely right. When push comes to shove, the players have got enormous power here, Kieran, should they choose to wield it.
That is the case. It now looks as if FIFPro, which is sort of the world union of football players, is now going to take up this as an issue. It's a competition which nobody is asked to be expanded, with the exception of the people who want to make more money at FIFA. We still don't have venues agreed for it. We still don't have the format confirmed. We still don't have the TV deals confirmed. It's not looking great. So football players, they don't want to get involved in the concept of things such as strikes, and it has to be coordinated. And I think there's one major difference in that we are dealing with 24 clubs scattered across the world. So it could be that trade union legislation in some countries, for example, who might be deemed to be participating in the competition, trade union rights are outlawed. So there are broader societal and economic and cultural issues to deal with, but we'll try and get Maheta on the show because he's been on before and he's very articulate with regards to the protection. I was reading a report over the weekend about the level of injuries in the Premier League season, and it was a record year last season. And as a professional in whatever aspect of life, you always want to do your best. And people who are having to put in 85% performances because they're constantly carrying a niggle or something in order to try to get through, or who are taking medicines and injections, and etc. That is a cause for concern. It affects the overall quality of the product. So watch this space, Jeff, when it comes to the legal. I believe FIFA Pro are trying to get the lawyer who successfully acted for Jean-Marc Bosman, and that had an interesting conclusion, as we know.
Didn't it just, yeah. For those of our new listeners who don't know, Maheta is the head of the PFA, the Professional Footballers Association. So, yes, we're due to be talking to him in the next couple of months or so. So this will be something, Jeff, that we very much will put to him. Our final question, Kieran, is another interesting one, and it affects more clubs than Sheffield Wednesday, who it's about. And it comes from Mark Easton. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I was about to say it's a cool name, Kieran, but that would be very cheesy to say Mark Easton was a cool name. Mark's question is this: when Sheffield Wednesday sold their 10-year season tickets, I was intrigued as to why they wouldn't accept credit or debit cards. I saw Section 75 issues mentioned, but surely this is the vendor's choice, as I can't see any reason why card providers would make this restriction. The only thing I can think of is that Wednesday are registered themselves as a credit provider, so maybe they want to make coin on any credit-based transactions. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, Kieran. And first of all, I'd love to hear what a Section 75 issue is.
I'm now going to use my inner Martin Lewis.
Okay.
People may be aware is that if you use a credit card to buy anything which costs more than £100 and less than £30,000, and that product is faulty or that product fails to be delivered, then you are entitled to a refund from the supplier, from the credit card company. So the credit card companies are, it's part of the deal. It's part of the reason, and part of the reason why they charge such high interest rates as well. It's a quasi-insurance policy. I think the concerns from the perspective of a credit card company, if I was Visa or MasterCard or Amex or whoever it was going to be, if it's a 10-year season ticket, if Sheffield Wednesday go bust at any point in time over the next 10 years, I could therefore be faced with some very angry owls saying, I've paid for 10 years. Under Dejan Chansiri, the club has had an erratic time, I think is the politest way of describing it. And they could be demanding refunds. So it could be that they've made a risk-based decision that they're not 100% certain about the success of the club, and they don't want to be in a position where they have to give refunds. So they simply said to Sheffield Wednesday, we're not prepared to provide a credit line as far as this particular product is concerned. So I think that would perhaps be the driving force. You don't get Section 75 protection with a debit card. So I don't see why clubs aren't willing to use that. But I did hear the story that people were having to physically take cash to Hillsborough. Yeah. From what I heard, sales were probably in single figures.
Oh, really?
With regards to this product. And that came from a journalist that I'm friendly with in Yorkshire who said, it was more of a public relations exercise than anything else. The deal itself was actually quite good because it was a 10-year countdown. And I think the 10-year countdown only started when Sheffield Wednesday got back to the Premier League.
Yeah.
So very strange one.
I imagine, Kieran, where you live, on a daily basis, you're faced with a selection of angry owls anyway, aren't you? to go with the slightly dopey deer, angry owls, manic dog. I suppose about 5 or 6 seasons ago, Kieran, there was a slight fad for clubs offering 10-year season tickets. And it's not something I've seen, certainly in the Premier League, anybody offering at all. Is that down to your theory that clubs, certainly in the Premier League, would, in an ideal world, phase out season tickets anyway, or are they just not a financially viable thing to do? Because it's all very well getting the 10 years worth of money now, but 5 years down the line, you're not getting the season ticket money then, are you?
That's right. And of course, we've seen the increase in prices in season tickets. So clubs will have done their sums. They will have realised that, what proportion of fans are going to, if you're paying, 600 quid a year, 700 quid a year for a season ticket, how many fans within the fan base have got 5, 6, 7 grand spare to commit themselves? Yeah. So the uptake is likely to be fairly low. The downside is that it prevents you putting in season ticket price increases. And also there's complications. I've been contacted by some Ipswich Town fans over the course of the weekend saying, I was really looking forward to next season, but I've just been shifted because we now have to make way for an expanded press box and media centre and so on. And my mate who I've been going with, he's managed to keep his seat because it's just the way that things have gone. And they go, well, yeah. And as we've often said, it's not the football we go for, it's a social experience as well as an entertainment experience. And it's building up those relationships with people who we've become friends with, albeit on a once a fortnight basis on some occasions. So, yeah, I think clubs are protecting themselves. It seemed a bit of a crazy scheme, but crazy schemes and chancery have gone hand in hand for quite a few years at Hotspur.
Time for that interview, Kieran, this little bonus interview with the Supercomputer prediction provider, your friend Ben Holmes. And this is what Ben and you had to talk about.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, thank you, Kieran. Yeah. All right. How are you doing?
All is good. We're recording this just for the sake of anybody listening, the morning after the England victory, which your supercomputer predicted. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. No, it's been quite a good weekend for the supercomputer so far. Obviously, Germany was a really good start. Unfortunate for Scotland. Still hope for Scotland. I think going through as one of the 4 best third place teams. And then, good start for England. Not as good as the Germans.
Okay, so for people not familiar with this, and let's, for the sake of transparency, we both work at the University of Liverpool, but you're a proper academic and I'm a white boy, I think is the best way of describing it. How did you come up with this idea? You're working with a couple of our academic colleagues as well, and I know Ian very well, who's an amazing genius. But what was sort of the background to all of this?
Well, it actually, the tournament simulation actually goes all the way back to my master's, which I did at Liverpool in the mathematics department. And for my dissertation, I actually developed a model to simulate the 2018 World Cup using, I don't know if you've heard of ELO ratings.
Oh, yeah, I have actually, yeah.
So using ELO ratings to simulate the World Cup. And we actually predicted France in the end for that. So that was a nice result from the dissertation. And then, we'd always meant to just sort of do a bit more with the work that I'd done for that. But, you get busy, you've got other projects going on. And so then when I did this other paper recently with Ian about predicting football matches using sort of a player-based model, so as opposed to the ELO ratings where you're rating the team, we're trying to rate the individual players on that team so we can account for injuries and suspensions, things like that. And so then, once I had sort of all those pieces, it just made sense, really. And, I wanted to have some predictions for the Euro myself, just to put a few bets on and things like that. And so, just put them together, basically, and here we are today.
So many people are familiar with the concept of artificial intelligence and machine learning from a layman's point of view. That's what clever people do. How does it work in practice? Because I go as far as sticking numbers into an Excel worksheet for all the work that I do, which is very historic in nature. But you are taking it a step further, you're not looking, you're using history to predict the future.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Well, I suppose, similar to you in the first step where you've got, big Excel or a big file full of data, full of all the numbers on, let's say, how many goals like a team scores over the last 5 years or something. And then you've got a whole bunch of models basically that you can just supply all this data to, and then the model just learns what just the average, the simplest model would be just taking the average of the team's goals that they score and then using that to predict how many goals they'll score in the next game. But then, you can start adding in, let's say, home advantage, which obviously has a massive influence on how many goals the team would score. Then you can add in, which players were playing, which players were missing as well. And all these things, the model can just learn essentially through, a lot of maths and a lot of behind the scenes algorithms. But the models can just learn what the most likely thing is going to be based on any variables that you give it, essentially.
Even things like weather?
Yeah, definitely. Weather's a hard one because it all comes down to what data you can get, really. If you can get, the data on the weather, if you're looking at international games over, 10 years, you'd need to have the weather in each of these localities over time. So that's where it gets hard. But if you have the data set with all the weather, then absolutely, you can put that in.
Absolutely amazing. So you mentioned that you've moved away from a team-based approach to a player-based approach. Where do you get the data from, the players? Is it a case of going to Football Manager or Transfer Market, or are you doing your own research into what makes a player good? And then, we've often said that the best teams are more than the value of the 11 players put together. Is there a way of bringing that into your model as well?
Yeah, definitely. So to answer the second part first, so you could put, let's say people don't like Southgate so much, they think maybe he doesn't get the most out of the 11 players on the pitch. You can put, sort of a Southgate variable, let's say, into the model. And, if you're right and Southgate does make the team worse, Southgate will have a sort of negative impact on goals scored. Vice versa, he could also have a positive effect on goals scored. And I think this is actually something that myself and Ian are actually looking at the moment, is sort of trying to rate managers as well as the players and see what their impact is on a team. And in terms of what data we're using, so yeah, Transfer Market, you can use Transfer Market valuations of players. So they've been shown to be quite good predictors of football matches. But obviously, the valuation isn't so much like a rating of the player. There's obviously a lot more to evaluation: potential, position, how long on their contract, things like that. But it's a good starting point, and then you can look at, there's different models to sort of take what actions a player does and turn that into an overall number. But yeah, again, lots of different variations of these kind of models that you can put together.
Cool. And in terms of, this ultimately this is a finance show, and you hinted at the start of the conversation that you may have been tempted to place a wager or two. Do you ever get approached by stakeholders in the game? I'm not saying just bookmakers, but potential investors in clubs or investors in leagues or private equity, or even fans and clubs themselves, to say, what do you think our prospects for the season are based on what we've spent to date? I mean, because surely there has to be value in all of that, and you must be aware of the likes of Opta and the other sort of big data, scouting and organisational bodies that do this on a sort of on a commercial basis. But you're looking at it through an academic lens.
Yeah, I think there is definitely those applications, and they're getting more and more. I'm sure you know that clubs are investing more and more into their data departments and building teams of quants that do maybe fairly similar stuff to myself. And so definitely you could use the model for it, especially with the player-based model. A really nice really nice part of it is you're able to see the impact of a player getting injured, for instance, and you can see how the probabilities throughout the tournament or throughout a season in club football would change based on different players getting injured. But yeah, obviously another one is the bookmakers. That's another obvious application. And I think I haven't actually tested whether, these tournament predictions would make you money in the long run. That's another paper for another time, I think.
Amazing. And just sort of looking at this tournament as a whole, you said it's all player based. Who's the most valuable player in the tournament based on your analysis?
I think Rodri is actually really high up in the player ratings, and I think it's quite backed up by what was that streak? He had the longest streak of never losing a game, didn't he, over club and country? So the model, he gets really good ratings in the model in terms of his impact on the teams that he's playing in. But off the top of my head, I'm not actually sure who it is at the moment. Who's the best one at the moment?
No problem at all. We might need that for a separate conversation, just in case I'm thinking of putting a few extra quid on England or Spain, by the sounds of it. In respect of the model itself, is it sort of fixed or variable? Are you going to be finessing it as the tournament proceeds to see, after the group games, will you do a revised version and so on?
Yeah, definitely. So ideally, you would do it after each sort of match or each set of matches. So even for the second games in each group, I'll try and update all the data, fit all the models again, so we get slightly adjusted ratings for each players based on the last game they've just had. So, Germany might actually go even stronger in the model, considering, the game against Scotland. And then, obviously, if there was a bit of a shock, let's say England had have lost last night, then we could include that into the rest of the simulations, and England's chance would obviously have gone down at this point.
Good. I think I saw your original model when you said that Scotland, and I'm speaking here because I've got a wife that was born in Edinburgh, that Scotland had a 59% chance of getting through to the knockout phase. So given that you predicted them to lose the first match, that shouldn't have changed much, I would assume.
That probably won't change much. Maybe the only problem is because of the margin of defeat and just how bad that game went. When we update the data now, the ratings for the Scottish players might go down a bit, not super dramatic, but they might go down slightly. And so it might end up they've got a bit of a less chance than 59% now, but it shouldn't be too dramatic. Yeah,
that's good. It's good for my domestic life. In terms of football yourself, do you support a club? Do you fear that your club bias might impact your analysis when you're doing this work, or do you try to be completely objective?
Well, I'm a very proud but unfortunate, let's say, Evertonian. so it's we're always a fairly good example, I think, as well. There's always just a lot of funny context with Everton when you're doing these things where they can make good examples and which players are playing and which players are injured. So no, Everton are actually usually a good example for me, especially when we're doing this rating managers project. And managers is obviously always a hot topic with us.
I can imagine. Yes, there's a bit of a merry-go-round. Good finish to the season, and always, as for football fans, we're always looking forwards rather than backwards. Yeah, that's you've got to approach that approach. For people that have not seen the model, what were your predictions for the final? Who's going to be in the final and who's going to win?
So the most likely final, which would be very interesting, would be England against Germany, and that would be after. So I think we would play France in the semi-final, and Germany would play Portugal in their semi-final, and then we'd meet together, and Germany would just edge it. So they would edge that match, winning it 59% of the time, basically.
Oh, right. So England has still got a pretty significant chance based on your predictions, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I think could be. Seems fairly believable, I have to say.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. And if people want to find your model or to find you as far as the work that you've done is concerned on social media or elsewhere, where's the best place they can look?
So there's an article about the model that was posted by the University of Liverpool recently. So you can read about the model there. And then there's a link to one of the papers that sort of talks a lot more about the model. In terms of where to find me, you can find my LinkedIn, Benjamin Holmes. My email address is on the university website. And as well, I'm setting up a Twitter account where I'll be posting the simulations throughout the tournament.
Ben, thanks so much for your time, buddy, and I hope that your predictions come true, but England perhaps doing a wee bit better.
A little bit better. And Scotland, maybe.
And Scotland, yes. For the sake of my domestic harmony, that'd be absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kieran. Nice speaking to you.
It's very interesting, Kieran, I have to say. Having watched the Scotland game, I think it's slightly optimistic that he still thinks Scotland are going to qualify. And also having watched a squid predict last week that Germany were going to win the final, and having watched the woman in your neck of the woods, I believe, who foretells the future by throwing asparagus up in the air. I'm not sure what the science is involved in that. She reckons England are going to win. So I'd be slightly embarrassed if Ben Holmes and this fantastic computer thing he's come up with was beaten by both a squid and a woman throwing asparagus up in the air.
It's true. Ben reckons the final will be England-Germany. I think he said Germany beat Portugal in the semi-finals, England to beat France. Yeah, it'd be two cracking semi-finals if those are the four teams, without doubt. And having married somebody from Scotland, it was solace to the Baroness over the weekend. Not as much solace as she took from a local sparkling wine. Following the defeat, has to be said. But it is solace that he's still confident that Scotland will just about sneak through to the knockout phase as far as the competition is concerned. But I think it's indicative of where football has come. The fact that people are using data and analytics, and as Ben said himself, and he remember the old Tefal advert. His brain's that big. Compared to like me and his colleagues that he's worked on this is the type of data which is now increasingly being used by a variety of stakeholders in the game, including the likes of bookmakers in terms of their predictions, and also people trying to beat the bookmakers, the organisers themselves, because they'll be trying to work out where's the best place to have quarterfinals, semi-finals, and so on. That they'll be using this, they'll be crunching this type of data, and all of this type of thing goes into the modern game, and it shows that it's far more than jumpers for goalposts.
Yeah, was the Baroness solaced as a newt?
That's right.
You've half answered my question, Kieran, about the practical application of this. I mean, as you say, it's a fantastic, genius piece of work. But could a club, for example, once they've seen that the data stands up over a couple of seasons, could they go to Ben and say, look, you predict that we'll finish fifth in the Premier League? Could they then ask Ben how much it would cost them to finish fourth? If they say, if we were to buy player B, could he factor that in, and then they could actually work out in advance how much they might need to take the next step? Or is that beyond even Ben's brain power?
No, because they've moved from club-based metrics to player-based metrics, we are now moving into an environment, using machine learning in particular, where you can work out the value of an individual player potentially to a club. And if we take a look at Kevin De Bruyne, when he negotiated his most recent contract, he actually used one of the data analytical companies to go in to show his value to the Manchester City board. And he said, right, I want a new 4-year deal. This is how much money I want. And this is why I think that's the case. It's you get out the spreadsheet data. Yeah, okay, ultimately it's numbers on them. But if you understand numbers, and the people that Kevin De Bruyne used were very much statistical geniuses, you can see the value of an individual player to a club. And I think the other thing that Ben raised was that the most valuable player in the tournament is likely to be Rodri, because he just makes a difference at both club and country level. So I think a switch to individual. And if I was Rodri, I'd be lapping up this stuff.
Yeah.
When it comes for his next contract, he's very much in a strong position.
The downside to that Kevin De Bruyne approach is that if Jean-Philippe Mateta had tried that last season, he would have been sacked. And yet it turns out he's the best striker in Europe after all. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, and you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show as well, you can email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter, X, and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to buy our book, and our book is coming out in paperback soon, you can find details on that same website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with our news pod and that analysis, as Kieran promised, of the election party's manifestos vis-à-vis football finance. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to said Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, thank you to everybody who's supporting us via the Patreon vehicle. For as little as £3 a month, you can get an advert-free version of Price of Football. But there's another way you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. I think we've got 2.4 thousand reviews on various apps these days. By all accounts, it doesn't matter what you say. And I'm not sure I necessarily want to listen to this one, but you could even say you would rather have the show presented by John Wayne and Wayne Lineker. I'm just not quite sure what direction that would go in, but it would be different.
It would be short. Having met one of them, I'm going to veto that one, Kieran. I'm going to say no.
Oh, you're right.
I'm going to say no. Let's not do that one, Kieran. And before we go, Kieran, we'd just like to reassure our listeners that no deer were hurt in the making of this programme.
Thanks to my brakes working. Yes, absolutely.
You took the edge off that a little bit, Kieran. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.